This here is a Northstar Horizon. Now I've wanted one of these ever since I found out that they were made quite close to where I live. Now when I got it, it turned out they were made in Berkeley in California, not Berkshire in southern England. But the thing is, I've got it now, so I may as well talk about it anyway. Now I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, why is this showing us some old CP/M machine? I mean, CP/M is quite polished, but it's still quite dull. The thing is, this didn't start out as a CP/M machine. In fact, it came as a kit. It had the option of a machine code monitor, and it had a wooden lid. Sounds like a hobbyist machine to me. Although to be fair, you would have had to have been a special kind of hobbyist to have afforded the £1,600 price tag. And I can't help thinking that if you'd spent that kind of money on a kit, it must have been a pretty anxious moment when you switched it on for the first time. Now the keen-eyed amongst you will have noticed that this is a bit tatty around the edges, to say the least. It reminds me of that BBC Micro that got run over by a Land Rover. But the thing is, it's made of wood, so I reckon we can fix it. But more on that later. Now if you've read up the history of the Northstar computer, you will have read that it was started by Mark Greenberg and Chuck Grant as the Kentucky Fried Computer Company, selling IMSIs and so on from a Berkeley garage. Now the story goes that they received a cease and desist letter from Colonel Sanders and decided to choose the less paltry name Northstar. I mean, I don't know why they didn't go in Northstar Books, to be honest. To be honest, I'm not really sure if any of that is particularly accurate. For example, Northstar Computers was incorporated in June 1976, and yet here's a Kentucky Fried Computers advert from February 1977. I mean, the advert includes Northstar products. So clearly the two entities operated side by side, at least for some time. Anyway, Northstar's first product was a floating point board, which I'm assured has nothing to do with surfing, but a math processor. But they were probably better known for their disk drive system, which came with a disk controller, an S100 disk controller and some disk drives, because it was a lot cheaper than others that were around at the time. Of course, with the success of these products, it wasn't long before they had their own machine, which funnily enough had built-in disk drives and an optional floating point board. So with the dodgy lid stored safely away, we can see inside, obviously. We have a Z80 CPU card, that's a Northstar card. We have 3 memory cards all from different manufacturers, and we have our disk controller card. I've also got these cards here, these S100 cards here. We've got a disk controller, floppy disk, double density disk controller, that unfortunately doesn't work. We've got a Northstar memory card, which has lost its memory. And we have a hard disk controller without the requisite hard disk. Apart from that, we've got a clock card which seems to want to go back in time, and we've got other bits and bobs. There's a prom board, for example. Now apart from all that, I've got these I/O boards which are normally connected to my KIM, a Kimsey board attached to the KIM. So there's analog, digital I/O boards and all of that sort of thing. The thing is that these things are not too expensive. If you keep your eyes open, go to shows, you'll pick them up at a reasonable price. They can turn your Northstar into anything you want. You know, it could be a speech synthesizer or a logic analyzer or a controller for a deep fat fryer. The world's your oyster, really. So the thing is, if it wasn't a hobbyist machine back in the day, well, it certainly is now. Now, the other thing that's significant about this machine is that the motherboard isn't just a board with loads of sockets in, it's got some I/O chips in there as well, which means that it's already got built in a serial port and parallel port, in fact 2 serial ports and a parallel port. So it means I can just plug my terminal straight in the back without needing any extra I/O boards. The other thing, of course, which we briefly mentioned before, is that the CPU card has the option for a machine code monitor. So apart from all this S100 stuff, I also have this, which is obviously an external floppy disk drive. Now my understanding is that had I bought an external floppy disk drive unit for my Northstar Horizon from Northstar, it would have been one of these. So it would be quite good to get this working. This was given to me by Pete from Short Circuit. And the only thing wrong with it really, it could do with a wooden case, I reckon. But anyway, the only issue with this is that it turns out to be worth a few bob. So obviously once we get it working, I'll probably have to give it him back. Although he might not be watching, of course. Now, the floppy disk drives use hard sectored disks. This is a hard sectored disk, and it has, you probably can't see, but it has lots of little holes in here, which mark the sectors, as opposed to, say, a soft sectored disk like this one, which just has the one hole, not counting this big hole in the middle, obviously. Now, my good friend Dave, aka Devilish Design, gave me some spare hard sectored disks, so I'm kind of all right for now. But going forward, I thought I'd fit this little gadget. Now, this was sent to me by its designer, Mike Douglas, and it is a virtual sector generator. Now, what you do with this is you simply connect it between the disk controller and the disk drive, and it measures the speed of the disk and what have you, and generates all the signals that a hard sectored disk would, one with all the little holes around there. Now, what that means is you can use a soft sectored disk, the more popular one-hole disk. Well, 2 holes if you count that. And it also means you could probably use a Gotek. This particular machine is a 110 volt machine. So it's really important to remember that if you're in the UK or in Europe, not to plug it into your local main supply, especially considering that this has got a wooden lid. Now, the point is that if you're likely to do that, it's worth remembering that these things came with a metal lid as well. It's not quite as cool, but at least it's guaranteed to stay that way. Now, I have a very well labelled 110 volt supply lead, so it's not a mistake I'm likely to make. Now, normally when presenting a machine like this, I would try and capture something of the experience that you might have had back in the day. But today I thought I'd capture a different kind of 70s experience. Now, like many back in the day, before the microprocessor and all the computer kits and all the rest of it, I spent a lot of time building hi-fi units. But to be honest, there's only so many kind of amplifiers and speakers and stuff like that you can have. And then what with that and all the arguments about whether valves sounded better than transistors, kind of led many of us to kind of ignore all of that and go off and start making wooden cabinets for all the hi-fi systems that we'd already made. Now, as you saw earlier, the original case for this is quite tatty really, but it's fairly complete and I think it'd be a fairly simple thing to fix. Then I remembered something Adrian said to me, aka BinaryDinasaurs, when he came here to help me move house. Now, Adrian has one of the largest, if not the largest, collection of historic and retro computers in the UK, and naturally he has a Northstar Horizon. What he doesn't have is a lid for it. So I thought, why not relive the 70s by making a wooden cabinet, except of course this time we won't be putting a stereo in it, we'll put Adrian's Northstar Horizon in it. After all, I've got some experience of making wooden cabinets for old computers. Somebody famous, not quite, said that to spend time improving something is to believe in its future. So for that to work, I've clearly got to up my game for this one. And this is what I came up with. So if you've got a friend with something missing up top, or you've got a Northstar Horizon missing its lid, or you simply mislaid it, and I've done that a couple of times, I thought I'd show you how I did it. Now, it's pretty simple to do, to be honest. I started off with 3 bits of wood. I'll just get these, hang on. Here we go. Now, obviously these started off as 1 piece of wood, and the tricky bit, the only tricky bit really, is cutting this slot down here. And that slot fits, you know, like so. So obviously we've got 2 sides and a top. Brilliant. Now, to cut the slot, I simply used one of these. Now, this is an old circular saw. Now, if you don't have one of these, then chances are one of your neighbours has. And I just set the depth to about 8mm and then basically cut a slot. I put a piece of a batten against the wood so I could run it along, and then what I did, I moved the batten 2mm and did another slot, so I ended up with a slot 4mm wide. Obviously it depends on the width of your blade and what have you, but they're usually about 2mm, so it's really easy to do. And obviously then when you've got your slot, all you need to do then is pop them all on like so. Screw and glue them together, There we are. Because this is going to be veneered, I painted it with a substance called shellac. It kind of fills in the grain and makes it super smooth. You don't have to use shellac, you can use any old paint or varnish that you've got, as long as you can sand it back super smooth, because it helps the veneer stick down. Now, the great thing about shellac is that it dries in about half an hour. And if you've got any left over, you can always use it the next time you manicure your nails. It is quite hard to get off though. Anyway, once it's all dry and smooth and what have you, you then add the veneer. Now, I got this veneer online, if you can see that properly. It's American walnut. It's quite easy to put on. It cuts really easy with a Stanley knife. And then you can paint it with shellac and wax it, whatever. And here it is again with 3 coats of sanded shellac and 10 coats of wax. Okay, enough of the woodworking, let's switch it on and have a look. Now, you can probably see from the screen that we're using the Vector Graphics monitor. Now, Northstar did provide a monitor. It was a 1K monitor, but this is 2K, so it's better. Now, Mike Douglas, he of Virtual Sector Generator fame, documented some modifications that allow you to use a 2K monitor instead of a 1K monitor. He also ported the Vector Graphics monitor over to the Northstar Horizon, and that's what we've got here. From this monitor we can dump our memory in ASCII or in hex. We can also show the registers. We can also load programs, test memory, check cards, things like that. There's quite a few commands actually. We can also boot our operating system. Like I said before, the Northstar Horizon makes a good CP/M machine, but it didn't start out that way. When Northstar first introduced their floppy disk system with the controller card and the disk drives and so on, they also included Northstar DOS or NDOS. They also included Northstar Basic, which was very similar to everybody else's Basic, but with 1 or 2 commands renamed and a few extra ones added. And of course, as time went on, there were more options. This is CP/M, for example. Now, there were also time-sharing options available. There was a time-sharing basic, which was a modified version of Northstar DOS or NDOS with the normal basic, and it had an extra program called Northstar Share, which sort of handled all the sharing elements. There was also an operating system that Northstar wrote called TSS. There was an A variant and a C variant. The A variant were time-shared Northstar applications. The C variant time-shared CP/M applications. Under TSS, each user had access to the same CPU card and typically would have lots of extra memory as part of that system. But probably the best of all was the Horizon 816. Now, this was typically a Horizon machine with a slightly improved power supply. Each connected user would have a CPU card that also had memory, and the CPU could either be an 8-bit CPU or a 16-bit CPU, hence the name. Now, a system like that obviously needed a hard drive, and it had a maximum of 8 users. Considering they started off with a dodgy name, they certainly made up for it when they named their first machine the Northstar Horizon. It really gives a sense of navigating towards the future. So why then did they supply it with a wooden lid? Now, it's a good job the thing is really well built, because I can imagine a smouldering component in here could soon get out of hand. What is often not mentioned is that when this was introduced, you could get it with a wooden lid or with a metal lid for the same price. Now, the fact that there are so many around with wooden lids just makes me think people liked wood. But then computers were still quite scary in the 1970s, and the fact that you could buy one that looked like something you already owned, like a television or a record player, was probably quite attractive. Now, the one with the wooden lid was often referred to as the Woody, obviously. Now, I don't know about the one with the metal lid. I'm thinking irony. Irony being that the company stuck with hard-sectored floppy disks long after everybody else had changed to soft-sectored ones. Now, I'm not quite sure why. Maybe they thought they were better, or maybe they just spent more time looking at their own horizon instead of the one everybody else was looking at. It seems though that they were ahead of the game in other ways. It looks like they were early adopters of the Osborne effect. In fact, 4 years before the term had even been invented. Simply because they introduced their double density disk controller before it was ready and inadvertently ended sales of their single density one. As time went on though, things got better. They introduced their hard disk controller, which you could get with a 5 megabyte hard drive. In fact, there was a whole catalogue of upgrades available. Now, beyond the horizon, so to speak, they produced a machine called the Advantage, which sadly, despite its name, probably wasn't. It was a really nice looking CP/M machine, but by then the go-to machines were the IBM PCs and compatibles with the new and exciting operating system MS-DOS. In 1984 though, Northstar bounced back with a PC compatible machine called the Dimension. Now, the Dimension was a server and the first to include NetWare as an option, and they continued to develop that machine right until 1989 when they shut up shop. As you can probably tell, I really like this machine. It's really well made, it's got built-in drives. Okay, the discs are full of holes, but I quite like that. Using a machine with hard-sectored discs, it kind of feels more, I don't know, authentic. The thing is, they've been really reliable. So, you know, it's probably why I never got around to fitting the virtual sector generator and putting a Gotek on it. I like the fact it's got a machine code monitor, which means I can start the machine up without having a bootable system and play around with the cards. I like the fact that it's got the serial ports built onto the motherboard, so I can just plug the terminal straight in. No hassle. So, like I said before, even if you didn't consider this to be a hobbyist machine back in the day, it certainly makes a good one now. I mean, it's the perfect retro machine. And on top of that, how many other machines qualify to be in practical computer and practical woodworking at the same time? It even matches my old hi-fi. So for a company that started with a silly name, they did all right. But why choose Kentucky Fried Computer in the first place? Well, to answer that, we need to simply look at the original Kentucky Fried Computer adverts. Now, at the bottom of the advert, you'll see it says a computer in every pot. This is a reference to a chicken in every pot, which was an expression started by Henry IV in France, I think, but was used in US presidential campaigns to mean that everybody should have access to food. So what the advert is saying is that everybody now has access to computers. So if you're going to align yourself with chicken in the US, it's not unreasonable that you would pick a name like Kentucky Fried Computers. But what about the name Northstar? Now, many have suggested that Northstar was a name picked because it was brighter than Altair. But it isn't. It's quite a lot dimmer than Altair. I think to answer that question, we need to look a bit more carefully about where Northstar is in the sky. Now, it sits in the constellation of Ursa Minor, which if you look carefully at Ursa Minor, it looks like something you might cook chicken in. So what you've got there is Northstar in a pot. Kind of makes sense now. Anyway, don't forget to like, subscribe, all that stuff, and I'll see you next time.
How long do we have to hold this for?
Just an hour.